Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Conn Report wherever you get your podcasts. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's A-M-P-I-R-E. You know that. I always appreciate you tuning in. So thank you again very much for listening now. Today, I'm joined by my ESPN colleague, Adam Teicher, who covers the Kansas City Chiefs, which means he covered Eric Bienemy's time with the Kansas City Chiefs. He knows a lot of what happened there. He knows what Bieniemy offers Washington and what you can expect from a Bieniemy offense, not just in terms of X's and O's, but some of the little details I think that really matter. And I think that have been lacking a little bit here over the last few years. And I think that'll be a good thing. So it's why I think of all the people they interviewed, I think he was the best choice, and they did too. But I do think he offers a lot. And I think that's the direction I would have gone as well, just because look where he's coming from. And then that demanding style, I think you could use a little bit of that here, especially if you're in your fourth year. And I think he's going to provide some energy and some juice to an offense that needs it. Now, what you also need is consistent quarterback play and a better offensive line. That makes any coordinator look a lot better. Please keep that in mind as we go through the offseason. Just hiring a coach is not going to be enough to turn this offense around. So more on that throughout the next 5 months. But before I get to my conversation with Adam, just a couple things. One, Adam and I tag teamed on a story for ESPN.com about Bieniemy, what it means to the Chiefs, what it means to Washington, and answered a lot of questions about why Bieniemy, what does it mean for the offensive changes, etc. Go check that out. Again, it's on ESPN.com. It was up on Friday. I should have mentioned that on the Friday podcast. Now I mention it now. So there you go. Anyway, that's number one. Number two, you can follow Adam on Twitter at Adam Teicher, Teicher. Again, covers the Chiefs, does a really good job. I've always respected his work. Few more things. The press conference for Eric Bienemy will be Thursday. So I'll have a podcast up later that day after our first impressions of hearing from what Bieniemy has to say. So that'll be on Thursday. I don't know. I know he spent the weekend, or at least Friday and Saturday, interviewing staff members on offense. I don't know what that means as far as what kind of changes might be forthcoming. We'll stay tuned, obviously stay tuned for that. I think we'll probably find out something earlier, at least by midweek. Certainly, I think before the press conference, the point would be having it then is to finalize that staff so they can kind of go in there. But that's just a guess. So we'll see. Then the other thing is congratulations to former Washington Redskin, D'Angelo Hall, who is now on the Carolina Panthers staff as an assistant defensive backs coach. And I always liked D. Hall. I thought he was very smart. And I do remember as he progressed in his career in Washington, and there were a couple of times I remember talking to him as he got older, and then coming away, like I would ask him one time about Calvin Johnson, for example, and just the detail that he went into, how you defend him, what his plan of attack was against him, what Calvin does well, very detailed. And I remember thinking like, this is part of his evolution as a player, because I think when he came in, by the time he was done, he was a better leader. I don't know if he was a perfect leader. He was a much better leader than he was earlier in his career. That's for sure. So I think he's a very smart guy. And I think I hope he does well. The other one is Drew Terrell, Washington's receivers coach. He had been mentioned in the running for the Arizona offense coordinator job. Did not get that. Wouldn't be surprised if they come after him as their pass game coordinator, but I don't know for sure if that's going to happen. So we'll see. That's just something to watch. I know when I've talked to some people here about the offensive staff, I think there's some groups that this team feels really good about, regardless of who's coaching them. And nobody said this, but my guess would be receivers would be one of them, because you have some really good pros, especially those first three, Samuels, McLaurin, and Dotson. But I also think guys like Cam Sims, I think Bieniemy does. I think those guys all take a really good approach. So I think that's going to make, if they do end up changing there, that because if Terrell does leave, that I think the transition will be pretty good because of the group that you already have. Anyway, that's enough from me. So let's get to my conversation with ESPN's Adam Teicher. All right, Adam, before we get to what people want to hear about, which is Eric Bienemy, I have a selfish question. What's it like to cover a team that wins a lot?
Well, stick around the Commanders for another year or two, and you'll have the answer yourself there, John. It takes some getting used to, because I covered a team for a lot of years that was not very good. And, they had their moments, they had their seasons, but it was always an isolated season. Believe it or not, until Andy Reid showed up, the Chiefs never in their history won back-to-back division championships. So this is a different deal. They've had isolated good teams, back in the early days of the franchise. They had a nice little run, but people forget when they won the first World Championship, Super Bowl IV. The Chiefs were a second place team that year. They were a wild card team. So, right. It's not been a franchise that's been steeped in history. So it is a little different. I mean, it's, you got to be prepared for your season to run into when you're working, to run into February. There's a lot that goes into it, but it's fun to see the fans really engage with the team the way they have the last few years. It's really been a fun thing to watch unfold.
It's funny because you've covered, in the last 15 years, you've covered more Super Bowls than I've covered. Wait a minute. Actually, I think it's the same number of playoff games that I've covered. You've covered Super Bowls. I've covered 3.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
3 playoff games in the last 15 years.
That's the way it used to be for the Chiefs, believe it or not.
Well, there you go. So a guy that Washington hopes can kind of help elevate their chances of having some postseason success and regular season success. Obviously, the guy you're familiar with, Eric Bienemy. You and I tag teamed on something for ESPN.com. People can go read, analyzing what this means for Washington, what it means for Kansas City, a little bit of insight, some insight into Bienemy. But I am curious in general, what is Washington getting in Eric Bienemy?
They're getting a guy who, player after player after player over the years, has told me he is detail-oriented down to the very most minute of details. All the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed. There's all these various game situations that the Chiefs maybe will never come across that he prepared them for, just in case they got to that point during a game. And so he's a detail-oriented guy, and that's what the Commanders are getting, no doubt. He's a player that is known to ride his players kind of hard, and that rubs some guys the wrong way. Not everybody, but there are certain players, particularly some veteran players, that have not appreciated that part of his game. But I know there's a lot of players who think the opposite, that his insistence on them doing things right is made them a better player than they otherwise would have been. Jamal Charles was that way. Adrian Peterson was that way. The Chiefs had a running back, an undrafted player about 10 years ago by the name of Sharkandrick West, who was an undrafted guy. No one really ever heard of him. He went to a small college. Well, he ended up sticking around and one year led the Chiefs in rushing. And I remember him telling me I wouldn't be in the NFL if it wasn't for Eric Bienemy. He helped me become what I was and take me to where I am now. So it's definitely a guy that a lot of people have credited for their success in the NFL.
How do you think he does that? When they talk about that, when Sharkandrick says that, what does he do, and would you see him do or hear that he does to kind of push them?
Just not letting anything slide, and you hear that from a lot of people. I mean, they're Pat Mahomes was saying the other day that Eric Bienemy, they go over the details all the time, every week. They go over the same things. And he's like, do we really need this? But then he said, yeah, I think we do, because then we get to a game and everybody's refreshed on it. Everybody knows what to do in this particular situation. So it's basically just the details. I mean, he's not afraid to throw a guy out of a drill if he's not getting it done the way he wants. So, they'll be, if a guy's not stepping with the right foot, if he's not seeing the things he's supposed to see from a particular linebacker or a defensive tackle or a defensive end. I'm talking about a linebacker here or a running back here. He'll say something, and he'll ask players, "Hey, what did you see from the three technique here? What did you see from him in that play?" And if the guy didn't know. If the running back didn't know, he'll get on it. I mean, that's the kind of thing. That's the kind of example that of things that Eric Bienemy will do for a player.
Would you see that a lot, like because I know we don't get to watch a lot of practices, but would you see that like in training camp practice and stuff?
Absolutely. More maybe when he was a running backs coach than as the coordinator. He stepped back a little bit, but you still hear his voice. He's got that booming voice, and sometimes he'll stand out over the pack. So when you see him at training camp, you'll hear his voice, no doubt about it.
And then as you talked about, like, because everybody would hear this. If you're going to coach that way, there are going to always be players who kind of chafe at that. And it seemed like whether it was, I don't know if it was, with Kelsey or with Mahomes, how would they handle that with him?
Well, they understand it's part of the game, and there was a little bit of friction at times. While there was a game earlier in the season in Indianapolis when things weren't going well for the Chiefs on offense, and there was an exchange you could see. I don't know exactly what was said, but you could see that exchange between Mahomes and Bieniemy, and it wasn't a friendly one. So there's definitely moments like that, and there's some players who don't like that kind of coaching. The Chiefs have had a couple veteran backs toward the end of their careers come through here who didn't really appreciate the way Eric Bienemy goes about his business, but that's so the Commanders are probably going to see that from time to time with certain guys, but most guys appreciate at the when everything is calmed down and things are the emotions are taken out of it. Most guys do appreciate that.
And you talk about end of guys coming to the end of the career. LaShawn McCoy was pretty vocal last week about Bienemy, but I also know it's his opinion, and I don't know what they would say about LaShawn McCoy. So what did you think of his comments? And for people who know, he kind of just ripped into him and said he was just ripped into him as a coach. But what did you think of that?
Yeah, and hey, I can't say exactly what his beef is without him talking to him, but that's the kind of example I'm talking about of certain guys feel like he rubs you the wrong way. Le'Veon Bell was here at the end of his career. He was not thrilled with how the Chiefs coached their backs and some of the things they did. So, you're not going to have a unanimous opinion about Eric Bienemy, but I know there was a lot of players who feel like he took them from one level to even a better player. Jamal Charles is on that list. Charkandrick West, like I mentioned. I think Adrian Peterson
Peterson loves him.
Yeah. So there's a lot of players who feel that way about him. So there's a little bit of mixed feelings. So specifically, what McCoy said, there's going to be some of that. There's going to be some players who will tell you that as well.
And I'll be clear here. You're going to have some coaches who don't coach hard enough, and it's going to rub guys the wrong way too. So I don't want to I certainly don't want to make it seem like I think that's a good thing for this franchise. But if you have a guy who's soft on somebody, that's going to be a complaint as well. So, you know what I mean? And, but but you hear that with him. And what is it like, I'm sorry, you bring up the details, the McKinnon play in the Super Bowl. Is that, where he runs down and basically slides at the 1 yard line? It sounds like that's something that now you would think that it's kind of commonplace, but it really isn't. So is that an example of something that he kind of focused on with them?
Yeah, Pat Mahomes said that's an example of the details they go over every week. The Chiefs call it church mode when they want a player to take a knee. That's what they call church mode. And Mahomes said they work on church mode relentlessly, and they were in church mode there when they got near the goal line in that particular situation. So he credited. I think Jerick McKinnon is a pretty smart guy. I think he's a guy who gets it. He probably didn't need the refresher course there, but he got one from Eric Bienemy regardless. And so that's the kind of thing that Mahomes was talking about when he says, hey, here's where he talks about all these various situations, some we never come across in a game, but some that we do. So that is an example of one of those things where Eric Bienemy sort of digs into the details.
What was his role? I mean, we know the title offense coordinator We also know Andy Reid's involvement in all that. But what was Eric's specific? What was he doing for that offense?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a mystery here because the Chiefs sort of try to keep that under wraps. Andy Reid, I think, called the plays most of the time. Bieniemy was involved certainly in putting together the game plan. In a lot of senses, was his baby. He was each week would put that together with Reid's blessing and discussion and all of that. But that's kind of what his baby was. And they certainly talked during the week about, okay, what do we like in third downs and third and short, third and long, and goal line and other short yardage, other situations. They talked about what they liked. But Eric Bienemy didn't always call the plays. I don't think he often called the plays, but he certainly was involved in the discussion. There was it wasn't just Reid saying, okay, I want this, dial it up. I mean, there was always a little bit of a discussion. Okay, what do we like in these situations? Let's rank them 1 through 5 or whatever it might be, and go through our list that way. So he was involved. The exact extent, I can't tell you that, but certainly it's not like he was just along for the ride. I mean, he was involved, no doubt about that.
So like those plays in the red zone, the Tony touchdowns, is that his input?
Well,
or do you even know?
Yeah, Chad Henne said something about that after the Super Bowl. He said something like, hey, this was something that Eric Bienemy had seen on video, that the Eagles tend to pass those guys off rather than follow a guy when they do a fake motion. So that's what he sort of credited Eric Bienemy for saying, okay, when we get to the right situation, we're going to have the guy basically stop and turn around and go the other way. And so that's what Chad Henne said. So I have no reason not to believe him. So he would certainly know about that. So that's the kind of thing that Eric Bienemy lent his voice to.
And listen, there's obviously a lot of talk around Bienemy about why he hasn't gotten a job. You've covered the other coaches from that group who have gone to other jobs, Matt Nagy, Doug Peterson. What do you think?
Well, why he hasn't gotten?
Yeah, just like because he's interviewed for a lot of jobs. I mean, and there's some obvious things here, but I'm just curious. You were around those guys.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt that Andy Reid's shadow is considerable here. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Eric Bienemy is not the consistent play caller, but neither was Doug Peterson or Matt Nagy. I mean, they were not consistent play callers when they were the Chiefs. Offensive coordinators. So they didn't really have to contend with that. Each of those guys got jobs, and really in their first time around in the interview process. So it's not like they had to go through anything like Eric Bienemy did. Now, one of the differences, neither of those guys coach Pat Mahomes. There's a considerable shadow there when you think about it. What would Eric Bienemy be like as an offensive coordinator without Pat Mahomes? Well, we don't know. There's some things in Eric Bienemy's distant past that are maybe trouble for some owners to get past, but you can't ignore the fact that Doug Peterson and Matt Nagy are white. Eric Bieniemy's black. I mean, at some point, 2 + 2 = 4, and that's the reason he's not getting the job. I can't tell you that, but certainly this is a situation that would lead to believe that's the case. So, I'm hoping that this move to Washington, he can have some success there, and that he can use that as a stepping stone to a new job or a head coaching job that he apparently couldn't get as long as he was going to stay with the Chiefs.
If he has a success here, it's really too hard to ignore what would then, and if you have that success here, you don't have to have match Kansas City. That would be awfully, awfully hard given what he's coming to. But if he can have success, I think it's hard to then just keep saying whatever the reasons were, it kind of goes out the window. So, but how did he deal with that? How did he handle that? And how did he kind of maybe even evolve in his role
over the years?
How did he handle all that?
Well, not getting a head coaching job, you're talking about. Well, hey, there's no doubt he was frustrated. And I don't think you take a move like he just did from going from what the Chiefs have going to what the Commanders have going without being frustrated. I mean, that's probably part of his thing going, you know what, I'm never going to get a job in Kansas City. I just got to get out of here. So I'm wondering how much of his move to Washington was, hey, I got to get out of Kansas City and get away from Andy Reid and get away from Pat Mahomes if I'm going to ever be a head coach. And how much of it was, hey, I like what Washington's got going on. I think that's a place we can win and be successful offensively. I wonder about that a little bit. But, he did open up a little bit last offseason about his inability to get a job. And he said, he took it on himself. He said, I got to be better. I've got to be better in my job right now if I'm ever going to be a head coach. So, there was some of that as well. So, I do feel like he's a guy who sort of gets it, that he understands how this is going for him and needed to take a different track to if he was ever going to be a head coach in the NFL.
And obviously, like, his contract was up in Kansas City. Do you think that there was part of Andy Reid said that would I almost wonder if there's some sort of agreement with both of them, like, if you do want this, you're going to have to go, and for both guys, or do you think he would have been back there regardless if he didn't get this?
I think the Chiefs would have had him back. Yes. If he had decided, I don't want to go to Washington, I would rather stay here, the Chiefs would have kept him on. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But Andy Reid knows the situation as well. He said as much. I can't remember exactly when. It was in the time leading up to the Super Bowl, sometime during the playoffs, possibly. But he said, listen, I think it's going to be good. He said something to the extent of, I think it would be good for Eric Bienemy to go run the show, be Eric Bienemy, and be successful that way. So I think even he's kind of frustrated that Eric Bienemy hasn't been able to get a head coaching job as well, that, he feels like maybe he was blocking Eric Bienemy's ability to get that head coaching job. Although, again, it wasn't a problem for Doug Peterson or Matt Nagy. Right.
Very much so. And then last thing, you think that this is going to work for him here? I mean, this is a tough situation he's coming to because of the situation Rivera's in. You have a younger quarterback with 19 passes, need an O-line. But there's stuff there here that you can work with. So what are you anticipating from him here? And it's a hard question because we don't know. He's not the only mystery here. There's mystery with other things, but we know that he's been an offense coordinator. He's got the experience with that. But what are you anticipating from him here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't expect him to be a miracle worker. I don't expect the Commanders to have, one of the best offensive teams in the league. I'm not expecting that. I'm expecting improvement, no doubt. I mean, they can't be near the bottom of the league.
Right.
And I don't care who the quarterback is or what they have around the quarterback. I feel like the pieces are probably going to be better than that. I love Ron Rivera. I think, they could be successful there, but without knowing, is Sam Howell the guy or are they going to go back to Taylor Heineke, somebody else? What are they going to do at quarterback? It's a little difficult to know, but I do expect some improvement. And to say they can't get into the middle of the league somewhere, maybe to that 15-20 range in terms of yards and scoring, is that unreasonable for what the Commanders have going on out there? I don't know. I mean, maybe that's a reasonable expectation for year one. Maybe it's not, but I would expect the thing to come to life maybe to a greater extent than what it's been.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing they need here is the energy, and it sounds like he's going to really provide that. I think that's and the details I think is very necessary. So, Adam, listen, I appreciate your time, and I've told you this before, and I love the work you do for us and the insight you provide to the Chiefs. So, appreciate you coming on. Thanks.
This was fun, John.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Adam for joining me, and thank you, as always, for listening. I'll be back on Wednesday or Tuesday night / Wednesday morning with another podcast. I'll talk to you next time.